Everyone thought Fred Rogers was the kindest man in America, the soft-spoken neighbor who made every child feel safe, seen, and loved. But behind that calm smile, there were stories even his closest fans never heard, until his wife decided to speak up. After years of silence, Joanne Rogers revealed sides of her husband that few people could have imagined. From the private jokes that shattered his saintly image to the pressures he carried quietly for decades, what she shared changed how the world remembers Mr. Rogers forever. Before the world ever knew the man in the cardigan, there was Joanne. Sarah Joanne Bird wasn't just the wife of Fred Rogers, she was his first audience, his lifelong collaborator, and often the only person who truly saw the man behind the television icon. Born in 1928 in Florida, Joanne was a gifted pianist who grew up surrounded by music and discipline. When she met Fred at Rollins College, it wasn't fame that drew them together. It was a shared love for art, faith, and quiet conversation. Fred, shy and thoughtful even then, proposed in a letter while studying at seminary. Joanne said yes, and the two began a partnership that lasted more than 50 years. While Fred built his career teaching children how to understand their feelings, Joanne stayed mostly out of the spotlight. But those who knew them say she was his anchor, strong, outspoken, and a touch mischievous. She grounded him, kept him laughing, and reminded him that even the kindest man in America needed someone to lean on. When people described her simply as Mrs. Rogers, she would smile, but those close to her knew she was far more than a supporting character in his story. She was the keeper of his truest moments, the quiet mornings, the letters, the doubts, and the joy that never made it onto television. But even someone who loved him completely said there was much more beneath that gentle image, and soon Joanne would reveal a side of Fred that no one expected. For decades, Fred Rogers was treated like a living saint, the calm voice who never raised his tone, the gentleman who always said the right thing. To millions, he was the symbol of pure kindness, almost too good to be real. But according to Joanne, that's exactly the problem. She once said she never wanted people to think of him as a saint because that would make his kindness seem unreachable. Fred wasn't born flawless, she explained. He chose patience. He practiced compassion. And that made what he stood for far more powerful. In interviews, Joanne often reminded people that her husband wasn't performing, but he was working. Being that consistent, that caring, took effort every single day. She said he had a temper, that he could be stubborn, and that he wrestled with doubts about whether he was doing enough. But instead of letting frustration define him, he turned it into empathy. That, she insisted, was the real Fred Rogers. Not a perfect man, but a man trying to be good in an imperfect world. This was the part of his story Joanne felt people needed to understand most, because to her, the danger of calling him a saint was simple. It let everyone else off the hook. If he was superhuman, then we didn't have to try. But if he was just human, choosing kindness despite frustration or exhaustion, then we could too. And while that truth made people admire him even more, Joanne would soon reveal something else, something that showed just how complex and surprising Fred could really be. The world saw Fred Rogers as calm, almost angelic. But Joanne knew another side, one filled with laughter, mischief, and the kind of humor you would never see on television. She once shared that Fred loved to make her laugh with the simplest, most unexpected jokes. In one interview, she admitted that his favorite way to break tension was through something as ordinary and childish as a well-timed fart. It was his way of reminding her, and himself, that life didn't always need to be so serious. At home, he was playful, teasing, and deeply affectionate. He loved word games, late-night talks, and joking about things that might have shocked his carefully built audience. Joanne described him as delightfully funny, with a wit that caught her off guard because it was so different from the calm, measured man who appeared on camera. When she laughed, he'd grin proudly, as if bringing joy to her meant more than all the praise the world could give. She said those small, silly moments were what kept their marriage grounded. Behind the soft sweaters and slow speech was a man who loved to laugh at himself, who could spend all day teaching children about feelings, and then spend the evening making his wife laugh until she cried. It's easy to think of Fred Rogers as a flawless figure, but Joanne's memories revealed something far more human, a man who found balance through humor. Yet behind those jokes was something deeper, a private weight he carried, and stories that showed even the kindest hearts can have complicated shadows. For all the warmth and comfort Fred Rogers gave to millions, there were moments in his life that sparked debate long after he was gone. One of the most talked about came from Francois Clemens, the African-American actor who played Officer Clemens on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Francois later revealed that in the early years of their friendship, Fred had privately advised him to hide his romantic life, suggesting that being open about it might hurt the show. To modern audiences, that revelation felt disappointing. Many wondered how the same man who stood for love and acceptance could make such a request. But Joanne offered a perspective that was both painful and honest. She explained that Fred's actions, though imperfect, came from a place of fear. Fear that television executives or conservative audiences might use it as a reason to cancel the program entirely. To her, it wasn't about rejection. It was about survival in an era that was far less forgiving. Joanne never tried to erase these stories. She believed that to understand Fred, people needed to accept the complexity that came with his humanity. He made mistakes. He struggled to balance morality with the pressures of public life. And those moments, though uncomfortable, made his message of compassion more meaningful because it came from someone who had seen how hard it was to live by it. These were not the easy truths fans wanted to hear, but Joanne knew the truth rarely is. And behind those controversies, she hinted at something even deeper, the emotional toll of being the man everyone expected to be perfect. Joanne often spoke about the quiet pressure that followed Fred everywhere he went. To the world, he was the calmest man alive, but at home, he wrestled with the weight of always needing to live up to that image. She described him as someone who felt emotions deeply, but rarely let them show in public. He carried sadness when others suffered, anxiety when the world felt cruel, and exhaustion from constantly trying to be the source of comfort for everyone else. There were nights, she said, when he would sit at the piano for hours, playing softly to release whatever he couldn't say aloud. Music was his therapy, his way of processing the sadness that came with seeing so much pain around him. And Joanne, who knew that side better than anyone, said it wasn't weakness, it was empathy. He felt things so strongly that they often consumed him. As he grew older, that sensitivity became harder to carry. Friends close to the family revealed that he sometimes questioned whether he had made a real difference. The world was changing faster than ever, and Fred worried that kindness no longer had the same power it once did. Joanne admitted that those thoughts broke her heart, but she never tried to argue him out of them. Instead, she reminded him that what he offered wasn't perfection, it was hope. And in his final years, when illness began to take its toll, Joanne saw that vulnerability turn into peace. He had spent a lifetime helping others face their feelings, now he had to face his own. But what happened after his death proved that Joanne's story, and her understanding of who he truly was far from over. When Fred passed away in 2003, many assumed the gentle world he'd built on television would fade with him. But Joanne refused to let that happen. She became the living bridge between the man the world adored and the man she truly knew. For nearly 2 decades after his death, she spoke at events, appeared in documentaries, and met countless fans, always with a quiet strength that reminded people of the same warmth Fred had given them. But Joanne's mission wasn't just to preserve his legacy, it was to clarify it. She wanted people to stop treating her husband like a flawless symbol and start understanding him as a real person. She once said that when people call him a saint, they miss the point. His kindness wasn't magical, it was intentional. He worked at it, practiced it, and sometimes struggled to maintain it. To Joanne, that made his message even more powerful. If Fred could choose kindness every day, so could anyone else. She also revealed that after his passing, she continued the traditions that defined their marriage: morning prayer, piano playing, and letters to old friends. Those routines, she said, kept her close to him. And when she watched reruns of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, she didn't see a television host, she saw her best friend. The man who used humor to make her laugh, who questioned himself when no one was watching, and who taught generations that love is not a performance, it is a practice. She carried that belief until her final days. Even when she faced her own health struggles, she never stopped defending the human side of her husband's story. To her, the truth she revealed wasn't about tearing down a legend. It was about reminding people that legends are built from humanity, not perfection. And though Joanne passed away in 2021, she left behind the clearest picture of Fred Rogers anyone could ever paint. Not the perfect neighbor, but the real one. When Joanne Rogers finally opened up about her husband, she didn't expose a scandal. She revealed something far more powerful. She showed the world that Fred Rogers wasn't an untouchable saint or a flawless hero. He was human. He laughed. He doubted. He got frustrated. And he carried emotional weight that most people never saw. But through it all, he chose kindness again and again. That's what made his message timeless. By sharing the truth, Joanne didn't change how people saw him, she deepened it. The real Fred Rogers wasn't perfect, and that's exactly why he inspired so many. He proved that compassion isn't something you're born with, it's something you build, one small act at a time. And maybe that's the lesson Joanne wanted everyone to remember. If a man as ordinary as Fred could live with such extraordinary grace, then so can we. So the next time you hear that gentle voice asking, "Won't you be my neighbor?" remember the woman who helped him become that man, and the truth she finally shared with the world. If you enjoyed learning the real story behind Fred Rogers and his wife Joanne, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Retro Celeb Talk for more untold stories about the icons you thought you knew.